Hello and welcome to the Holistic Psychiatrist Podcast, where building well-being from the thought up creates miraculous healing journeys. I'm your host, Dr. Alice Lee, the Holistic Psychiatrist practicing in Lehi, Utah. Today, I'm really happy to introduce our guest. Her name is Rachel Druckenmiller, and she came to my attention when I read her wonderful article on burnout in the workplace. Just to introduce Rachel to you, she is here to activate and unleash hope, connection, and meaning to our lives and our work. You might find her on LinkedIn singing or sharing insights about how to unmute yourself and live with greater courage, confidence, and compassion. She's the daughter of two entrepreneurs and has worked with organizations like Deloitte, Sherwin-Williams, Citizens Bank, and the Federal Aviation Administration. She's facilitated nearly 300 virtual learning experiences since March of 2020. She's recognized by Forbes, The Daily Record, WELCOA, and Workforce Magazine as an award-winning keynote speaker, facilitator, and entrepreneur. She's on a mission to help leaders and teams thrive and be fully alive. Rachel has a master's degree in health science and a bachelor's degree in psychology and is a licensed thriving workplace culture coach and health coach. She's also a founding member of the international nonprofit Global Women for Wellbeing. I'm really excited to have her be on our podcast today and have a chance to kind of gain her insights on a topic that I find interesting, and that is burnout in the workplace. So welcome, Rachel, to the podcast.
Thanks. Yeah, this I think a pretty timely conversation that we're going to be having that'll, hopefully help a lot of folks.
Yeah. So what I like to do is just kind of get your personal story initially about how you became more aware of this issue and how burnout had a personal effect on your life. Can you maybe start with that?
Yeah, so I've always been lifelong overachiever, hard worker. A lot of my identity growing up was rooted in my grades and how well I did in school. It's where I felt most capable and competent. I learned from a young age that you get rewarded for achievement. And so I carry that with me into adulthood. And in 2015, I had been recognized as the #1 health promotion professional in the United States by the Wellness Council of America, which put me on the map in a new way in my industry. It suddenly gave me a national platform for what I did. Mm-hmm. And what I did after that experience that was in 2015. I found that out February. And then I'm a journaler. I love mm-hmm. to journal. And happy to talk more about that. But I had written in my journal, like starting, I think in the spring of that year, that like, I'm at this pace. I don't know how much longer I can keep this going. Like I was telling myself, like the train's going off the tracks, Mm-hmm. But at that time, I'm like, well, they just said that you're the #1 health promotion professional in the country. Or, I was the director of wellbeing at the consulting firm where I worked. And I'm like, you got to uphold this banner that you've been given. And I think all of us have our own experience of that, of like, you have to be super mom, or you have to be super employee, or you have to be super friend, or you have to, whatever it is, super wife, or whatever it is, you have to like keep up this facade. And you can't ever show any cracks. Mm-hmm. And for me, the shift for me happened in September of 2016 when I had a dream that I was drowning. I was in my kitchen and the water kept filling up higher and higher and higher. And I started to panic. And all of a sudden a door appeared and I opened the door and all the water rushed out and I'm left standing on my kitchen floor, like just with the remains of whatever water was there. Mm-hmm. And those dreams you wake up from and you're like, oh, I'm really glad that was a dream. It was one of those moments, but I also remembered like that was a dream that you do not forget. And so I grabbed a journal and jotted down, September of 2016, I had this dream, blah, blah, blah. And then of course, like most people, I didn't actually do anything differently. I just like continued, like I missed the sign. Like, here is your sign, a dream you're drowning. Maybe you should pay attention. Mm-hmm. And a month later, I started having trouble with my memory. At the time, I was only 32 years old. So like this was concerning. I'd, be in conversation and couldn't identify or pick out certain words I wanted to say. And I just felt like my mind was like stutter stepping. And I was like, this is really concerning, because I speak for a living and I can't be frozen in the middle of a talk and like not remember what I wanted to say.
Right.
And so about a month after that, I got really, really sick. I had swollen lymph nodes, the worst sore throat of my life. I was exhausted. And I did, as a health coach, all the things I knew to do. Like I drank,
Mm-hmm.
smoothies, and I ate kale and flax seeds and chia seeds and all that stuff, And nothing I seemed to do would really make me better. And so I ended up back in the doctor's office on Valentine's Day of 2017
Mm-hmm.
with my husband when we were supposed to be at dinner together.
Mm-hmm.
And the doctor looked at me and he said, he's the same doctor that I saw back in October when I had my issues with my memory. And at that time, he said, maybe you're doing too much.
Very insightful of him.
Which, for any overachiever is like, do you understand that that's not a thing for me? Like, too much applies to other people. Too much does not apply to me.
Right.
And so I ignored him. And then I'm back in his office 4 months later. So, he wasn't judgmental. And he looked at me and he said, would you say that this was brought on by work or something from the outside? Or would you say that you brought this on yourself?
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of us in a similar situation would have been like, you don't understand. I have demands from this and demands from this and da-da-da. And we just want to immediately externalize all the blame.
Right.
But I felt really convicted in that moment. And I was like, oh, I have 100%. I've done this. I've done this to myself. I have put myself in a position where I have no margin, where I don't give myself permission to say no, where I stack so much on myself in terms of expectations that are nearly impossible to consistently meet. And I don't ever tell anybody when I'm having a hard time, and I don't ask for help. Like, the truth of what was happening was all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up getting diagnosed with Epstein-Barr virus, which is an acute form of mono.
Mm-hmm.
And I completely, for a period of time, even as early as back in December, 2 months earlier, I would periodically lose my voice because when I get sick, that's my throat is like my weak link in my body. And that's the part that gets compromised most easily. So I had a period of time where I lost my voice. I had to back off of speaking. I remember I sent an email to my boss, who's the CFO of our company, and said, hey, I need to make some changes to my schedule. Like, I can't have any meetings before 10 a.m. because when you're burned out and have mono, you sleep forever and you still don't feel rested. And I'd sleep 10, 11, 12 hours a night for weeks on end and not feel rested, which is really, it's really demotivating to like start to do things you should do. And for me, the gift, and like truly the thing that shifted things for me and gave me hope, which we all need when we're going through difficult situations, was an email from a nutritionist who'd helped me several years earlier recover from acid reflux and malnourishment. And she sent out an email and said, I've picked the topic for my final PhD project, and it's Epstein-Barr virus. This thing I'd never heard of that suddenly I had. And I immediately, I had like tears, and I emailed her and I was like, oh my gosh, I have that thing. Like, can you help me? And so then I hired her to, help guide me through it. And I got put on different supplements and a certain, eating routine. And I started to prioritize rest and set different boundaries and cut back on how many days a week I was speaking. And I started to let people in. I went to my church, was really involved in the, allowing people to pray for me and help me. And I totally bottomed out, and it caused me to completely open up.
And all of this transformation happened over a few months?
It started to. I mean, you figure the dream was in September, the diagnosis was in February, the email was in March from this doctor, from this, nutritionist. And then at the same time, it was the confluence of events is just wild. I had a friend reach out to me in March, who I went to church with, who texted me and said, warning, unsolicited observation coming, in a text message. I don't know if you've ever had a message like that, but I was like, I would prefer, can I have a choice of whether or not I want to read what's coming? Because I don't, but it was a lot, it was like a page and a half scroll, it was not like a little message. And she said, I noticed that you post on social media about not worrying about achievement so much, or about what people think, but if I may say so, you yourself rarely seem to slow down. You don't seem content or fulfilled.
Whoa. Oh.
Talk about a gut punch.
And this is a friend who's known you for how long?
A friend who'd probably known me for, I'd say at that point, maybe like a good 3 years.
So she knew you well.
She knew me well. And just called me out, and she was totally right, you know. And I think we have a tendency to get defensive
Mm,
when we don't like the way our life looks and somebody puts the mirror on us and exposes that. Like
mm,
we just stay in denial, you know. But I at that point, I was so clearly whatever I was doing was not working at all. And so I just became so, like, there was a shift in my receptivity. I just became receptive. And I wrote back to her and I said, you know, you're right. um, you're right. And I'm really trying to work on that. And, you know, like, thank you for being a friend. I mean, what a courageous person
mhm.
to be willing to send that to somebody, like not knowing how it's going to be received. You know?
It's so interesting when you talk about your journey, because the way I summarize it is that um, you went from talking about being well to living what it is that you were trying to teach others. And it required a shift in a fundamental perspective in your life, which is to prioritize a true state of authentic being versus prioritizing your need to succeed and have affirmation from society to make you feel, good enough. And that you could be doing the same thing, but like if you do it with a different kind of purpose, all of a sudden the whole thing kind of has a much better foundation. But it is a big, I think it's a really wonderful shift.
Yeah, well, I have to say, I appreciate that, and that's a well summarized, and it's the other thing that catalyzed that shift that you just mentioned
Mm-hmm.
was that at the same time, like I cannot even make up the sequence with which these things happened
Right.
that I did not control, that I was just receptive to. I mean, truly,
Right. Mm-hmm.
a coach of mine, a woman that I had met in 2009, who served as a mentor in the wellness industry because she was 10 years ahead of me, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and I really looked up to her. Her name's Rosie. And she reached out to me because she was going through a coaching training in something called Immunity to Change,
Mm-hmm.
which is Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy out of Harvard put together this protocol for basically how we navigate adaptive change.
Mm-hmm.
And at the root of it is that we have, you know, we have these goals that we have in our life, and then there's these competing commitments that
Mm-hmm.
exist.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, you know, I want to put myself out there and I want to spread my message, but I also, you know, don't want to appear disloyal, or if I'm not the best, I don't want to be doing it. Or if, you know, or what if I share something and I'm not original and unique, and then I'm irrelevant, and then like, why would anyone want to? And so I had all these competing commitments I was making to myself, of these fears that I had. And she had me turn them into a commitment statement, which was like, I commit to never appearing disloyal. I commit to always being the best. I commit to always having the best ideas. I commit, um, you know, I forget what some of the other ones were, but it was like all these commitment statements I made. And I looked back at those and I was like, I don't want to commit to, I don't want to commit to that. Like, no,
Well,
thank
it's a
you.
very achievement oriented approach. Yeah.
Yeah, so then I had to look at all of that, and then underneath of it, what is the big assumption underlying all of these beliefs that I had about myself?
Mm-hmm.
And the big assumption for me was essentially that if I, you know, put myself out there and it's not enough, then, you know, I'll feel rejected, and I'll realize that like who I am isn't enough, and that essentially I'll realize that I'm not good enough to be worthy of love and acceptance, and then I will feel like nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Then I was like, and then who would love a nobody? Like who would love?
Mm-hmm.
So like beneath all of my behavior
Mm-hmm.
were these like deep sources of pain, and that's true for all of us, right? Like any
Right.
maladaptive behavior,
Mm-hmm.
there's some type of pain or trigger or trauma. I mean, you could speak to that probably better than just about anyone.
Mm-hmm.
That causes us to show up in a certain way, that we do it because it worked at some point. Like for me,
Yes.
achievement when I was a kid, it was a way that I felt confident and competent, because I felt totally incompetent socially. I did not fit in school growing up. I My parents went through difficulties in their marriage. My brother and I didn't have a close relationship. He was like a loose cannon and I was like a goody goody, and I felt so I guess not confident and unstable in so many of these other areas of my life, school and achievement or work, like that was a place that I knew I could control.
And I think that that's the beauty of your message, is that whatever you've been able to authentically voice about your own experience mirrors so many other people's experiences. Because I think in society, I mean, I look at all of these different professions out there, whether it's in the arts or business or medicine or law, and you see the same kind of pattern, not only within the individual, but also within the society itself. It's almost like there is a couple of layers. There's the individual insecurity of not being enough, and therefore you have to, push yourself. And along with it is the message, the social message from everywhere, that you're right, you got to do this or else you're not going to be enough. And so with that kind of social message kind of continuing on, almost like the parents that you left behind when you were a kid, the social environment that now is parenting you is just as harsh and just as demanding as maybe when you were growing up from whatever system we come from. That it has that expectation that, okay, no, 100% is not enough. You got to give 110 because only then you can get a C,
Yeah, hustle, like get after it. I mean, think of all the messages we have, you know what I mean? Like get after it, like all of this really, and I'm a competitive person. Like I played sports growing up, and I'm strengths finder. Like competition is one of my top 5 strengths. Like I like winning, I like that sense of achievement. I mean, Enneagram, I'm like a 3 or whatever, any achiever. It's in my nature, and it's also, and so I try to look at the positive side of it, of like, I'm somebody who gets like, when I am mission driven to get something done, like I get it done, and I do a lot. I accomplish a lot, and and I intend to accomplish things that have impact and are meaningful. It's like if I'm putting it out in the world, like this conversation, like if I'm going to show up at a conversation, I'm going to come with all of myself, and I'm going to share the depth of what I have in that moment to share, because I intend to have an impact that's transformational on somebody. And so there's a gift to the achiever. There's a shadow side of the achiever, which is this belief that you must achieve in order to be worthy of acceptance or love.
Let's talk about stereotypes too. Some of the things that are expected of people in the health field, right? The stereotypes that I also am trying to break. That, for example, one of the things I do just because it's natural for me is to write about my personal experiences and share some of the things that I've learned, both from my practice and also from my life personally, because I just feel that it's valuable for people to learn, to break the stereotype of what a health professional should or shouldn't do. But I do think that there's a lot of non-spoken standards about what you can say and what you can't say, especially in the health field. So let's talk a little bit about how that puts an additional kind of expectation of our facades that we have to present to the public, and how that can create, burnout or whatever it is that mutes ourselves. Right? And your message is to unmute.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's okay. So specifically related to this message around burnout, I had forgotten about this. So I'm working on a book right now. And I had forgotten about this conversation until I was talking to my developmental editor about this story. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I forgot this. And I included it in the article that you read, which was when I started talking about burnout. So I burn out in February. By July, I'm doing a workshop for a local business forum, like a chamber kind of group, about how to beat burnout and move from fried to flourishing. Like as I'm figuring out, like I put the screenshot of the picture of warning unsolicited observation on the screen. I talk about what's underneath this. Like I'm not just saying, like I'm like telling my most honest, like truth and perspective I can about this, not something you're just going to go Google about. Like, what are the symptoms of burnout? Like, I'm going to get to the stuff that you're not going to see in a Google like search about what really drives this, which is our desire to be enough in some way, and a sense of disconnection. Because I really think burnout is a sense of disconnection from ourselves, from people around us, from our sense of purpose and meaning and values, and all of that is, our body. All of that drives burnout when we're disconnected.
Right.
And I started talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And a senior executive at my company said something to someone on not directly to me, but to another team member that was like, she's the wellness person. Like, why is she talking about burnout? And I was like, oh my gosh, like, do you not understand? Like, like if I I have a bachelor's degree in
Mm-hmm.
psychology, master's degree in health science, I'm a health coach. I've been in
Mm-hmm.
this industry for, at that time, 2017, I'd been in the industry for 11 or 12 years. If I have all of that knowledge, and this is what I live every day, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm burned out, like, how
Mm-hmm.
ironic, first of all. Like, I have to talk about it. Like, I felt this compulsion. I felt like it's irresponsible of me to be in this position, to have this platform that I have where people are listening to me, to not use that, to talk about something that a lot of people are experiencing, but not enough people are talking about. And so 5 years ago is when I first started talking about it, when I wasn't on the other side. So often we wait until we've like conquered the thing. Then I'll talk about it. I'll talk about it once I have it all tied up in a bow, and once I know all the perfect steps and I've got my life perfectly orchestrated.
And then you can say, voila, I have all the
Yeah.
answers for you, right?
Look at me. And I was like,
Uh-huh.
no, I need to talk about this now. I need to talk about it
Mm-hmm.
while I'm going through it,
Mm-hmm.
because then I can be most honest.
And it takes a lot of courage to do that, because I think one of the problems with burnout within the high achieving crowd
Mm-hmm.
is the shame and embarrassment of somehow not fitting in to everybody else that you believe
Yeah.
don't experience that. So I think it takes a lot of courage on your part to step forward and be able to authentically express what you were experiencing at that time. And I think that authenticity, it really melts the ice for everybody else, because if you can say it and you can talk about it, then they just kind of breathe a sigh of relief and say, well, if Rachel can talk about it, then I guess I can talk about it. And that's really a wonderful thing that you're doing.
Thanks. Well, and I've seen it. I've seen the impact it's had on people. I mean, there's a woman who worked for a global consulting firm that I was working with, and this was in, so Burnout, this was in January or February of 2018, probably.
Mm-hmm.
I was speaking to her company, a group of their project managers, about 100 of them, about how to, it starts with you, kind of beating burnout and becoming your best self or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was maybe like a 50 to 60-minute session. And 2 days afterwards, a woman reached out to me on LinkedIn who had been in the room. And she said,
Mm-hmm.
I've already made a huge change in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, that's great. Like, what did you do? She said, there's a question that you asked. She said, I'm a single mom, first of all. And she was based in the Mid-Atlantic for this job. And then she had to travel to the South. So she was constantly alternating between the South and Mid-Atlantic, just traveling way more than she anticipated she would.
Mm-hmm.
And she came home from the session, and there was a question I asked that I heard from a mentor of mine, from Simon Bailey, which was, who gets the best of you and who gets the rest of you?
No. Mm-hmm.
And I asked that question in the session, and she, like, it really hit her in a particularly just meaningful and resonant, timely way. And so she went back, I guess that day or the day after, and had a conversation with her partner. And she said, it's like, you guys are not getting the best of me, like my job is. And so within 48 hours, she had a conversation with her boss, and she asked to be rolled off of the traveling portion of her job so she could just be based in one spot. And her boss said yes. Wow. And she said, Rachel, she said, I slept better last night than I have in a year.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Like, we tell ourselves all these running stories and narratives about what's going to happen if we ask for what we need. And like, here's for sure what's going to happen if you don't ask for what you need. You're probably not going to get it. Like, if you don't ask for it, you're probably not going to get it.
Right.
And I had to learn that the hard way too, right? I was a little scared to press the send email of like, I cannot have any meetings before 10 a.m. It wasn't a question. I was not asking a question. I was making a statement. Like, if we don't, like, no one is going to prioritize our health more than us. Like, right. No one else is looking at your health necessarily and being like, your health is my primary concern. Like, no, not even a little bit, Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking a little bit about how I was getting to a point where I wanted to quit psychiatry in my third year of residency. I had gone through 4 years of medical school, which I totally hated. And then I went into my residency program to finally, after 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, finally gets to kind of get a sense of what psychiatry is all about. Didn't like it. Thought, this is a lot of work to find out that this is not Sala Salou, It's like, I don't want to be here anymore. And so I told the training psychiatrist that, and that was when they put me on Zoloft. And, just kind of like, here's a little bit of medication to keep you going. And I went through my residency and my child psychiatry fellowship after that. So another, 2 more years plus 2 more years. Well, I stretched the last 2 years to 3 years, but another, 5 more years of training. By the time you come out, it's kind of like what Mark Twain says, by the time you finish training, you have to kind of walk around on crutches just to keep your head, on your shoulders. You're like so overwhelmed by information. I was like, oh, okay, I'm ready to retire now. But so you come out of this training and you're like, okay, I'm in debt. I really don't know if I really want to do this for the rest of my life, but here I am. And because of the Zoloft and the withdrawal issues, 5 years down the road, that was how I ended up in holistic psychiatry. But it did start with burnout. It was like, I can't stand this anymore. I want to have a different vocation where I can actually do things that are fun, that I enjoy. And I went to a professor at Hopkins. He was a chairman of the English department because I always liked to write. And I always felt like, especially when in my deepest, darkest, angstiest moments, I always kind of dreamed that, oh, had I gone that path, life would have been perfect. So anyways, I ended up in his office to say, to check him out and see if I can transfer from my medical practice to begin a creative writing kind of like English kind of like career. And he looked at me, he asked me like, why would you want to do that? Like, he's looking, and I knew that when he was looking at me with that funny look on his face, and I think he referred something about the pay difference. Like to him is like, why would you want to trade your lucrative career that you're almost done with beginning something like this, which I'm just a poor English professor, even if I am the chairman at Hopkins. And so everywhere I turned, people couldn't understand what it is I was searching for in my life. But I really relate to the burnout thing because I do feel like in my practice also, I see a lot of very high achieving people who end up with mental illness because of burnout. One of my favorite patients, Anna, who's been on my podcast, was an executive. So she ended up with breast cancer and then went right back after that to a very high demanding job and ended up with pretty serious mental health issues. And by the time she came to see me, she was already on 6 psychiatric medications. So, but because Anna is a high achiever, she put all of that into her healing. And now she's going to write a book about her healing journey. So,
love it.
yeah.
That's what we do. I mean, I don't know, Les Brown or somebody that said like that make your mess your message. I mean, my life has been a consistent pattern of taking my messes, most of which have been with my health, and turning them into a message of hope for people, and not just like rah inspirational hope, but like, here's some practical things you can do. Here's some questions that you can sit with, that might be hard to sit with, that can help you as you start to navigate this and get some clarity,
Right.
It's just, I really see myself as a compassionate mirror. That
and and that's different than saying, oh, all of these problems are a blessing in your life. Because I just read an article recently where someone who's had a really traumatic life with very dysfunctional, abusive parents wrote an article about how it's not helpful to say that this is all a blessing and whatever. But I do think that for the challenges in our life, we can become the greater creator, and we can
Yes.
put into any experience all of the power that we have as, this divine creative being that is innately a part of us, and we can transform it because we are empowered to do that. And no matter what challenge we face, we can use it for kind of like the sand in our sandbox and transform it into whatever sandcastle we want to build,
Yeah.
and not let it, overpower us in
Yes.
some way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a choice. I think there's a grief, part of it is like the importance of going through, and I was trying to pull something up that I wanted to bring up in terms of, I haven't published this yet, but I'm going to publish it next week.
Okay.
About if you're feeling burned out, like do this first. Because usually we go right to like, what's the solution? Tell me the quick fix. What is my prescription? What is the recipe of all the things that I want to get out of this? No. Like the depth of spiritual growth that I experienced, the depth of relational growth, the depth of emotional growth that I experienced in the burnout journey was something I do not believe I could have had without going through that pain. And the discomfort and having my whole life feeling like it was just like turned upside down.
Right.
And I think we have a choice when we're going through difficult things. We have a choice about the story we tell ourselves about that thing. So to your point, I think it's like, it's a yes and, right? This is really hard and this sucks. And I wish this wasn't happening. And some days I'm really frustrated and sometimes I'm angry and sometimes I feel shame and sometimes I'm embarrassed. Like acknowledging what is acceptance, right? Like acceptance is one of the things that I've certainly experienced as one of the keys to building resilience. And saying like, okay, what ways of thinking, doing, or being are keeping me in this place or got me to this place? Like, it's not just what ways of being, it's it's not just ways of doing, it's what ways of thinking and being.
Right.
So like the thinking of, oh, if I demonstrate that I have any lack or need, then I'm needy, or then I'm a burden on people, and people are already burdened, I can't be a burden. Or if I ask for help, then I'm going to be a bother, and then people are going to think I can't handle it, and then I'm going to get taken off all these projects, and I'm not going to get that role that I want. Or like, we are so creative in our storytelling to ourselves that we never tell anybody else. And I think it's really helpful to get clear on like, what is the narrative? Like narrative you need to achieve to be accepted and to be loved. That's a pretty significant narrative. Like, so one of the things I had to do working with that coach, Rosie, was I had to challenge that big assumption. I had to look for examples of times when I was loved and accepted and I wasn't achieving anything.
And maybe your mentor, her name was Rosie. Maybe she felt the need to make you achieve so that she can feel like she's achieved something.
Well, she's also wired in a similar way to me as well, actually. But I love what you said about your client and how how she just funneled all of her achievement energy into healing. And I've done the same thing. Like every time I have faced a challenge, whether it was, the pandemic or getting hit by a pickup truck in the midst of the pandemic and fracturing my back, which was a whole nother thing. That was not chosen. But it's like, okay, accept the thing that is. How can I then receive any help and love and support that want to come in? Because trying to get through these really difficult things alone is really flipping hard and unnecessary. It's just unnecessary. And so how can I start to take in so that I get buoyed up? Because sometimes we don't have, in the case of the car accident, I was hit while I was out running, so not even in a vehicle. I literally didn't have the strength to like some days stand on my own. Like I needed my husband to like literally pull me up out of a chair, or I literally couldn't do those things. And I feel like the burnout journey 4 years earlier, I guess 2020, that happened, so 3 years earlier, geez, I had practiced my reps of learning how to receive help and learning how to ask for prayer, or learning how to really just like put on the brakes or to take care of and tend to myself. Like I had practiced that, how to receive when people want to offer help and support. I had so many opportunities to practice that in the experience of recovering from burnout that I then got to reapply 3 years later, not by choice, but like the situation wasn't by choice, but it was my choice to say, ooh, remember before when you went through a really hard thing that you didn't know how you were going to get through it, and one of the ways you got through it was by leaning on other people and not doing it yourself? Hey, let's try that again. Like that seemed to work really well. Why don't we do
Mhm.
that this time too? And it was one of the things, and it was, pandemic and lockdowns. It was like hard to be with people, but people sent me cards and they sent me gifts in the mail. And Jason Momoa, my friend Corinne, sent me a Jason Momoa coloring book of him. Like
Mhm.
he's the Aquaman character, he's really buff guy,
Oh,
like
yeah.
him like mowing a lawn or him like making a smoothie and like I just, we need these moments of levity. I watched a ton
Mhm.
of comedy. I think comedy is really a healing vehicle as
Mhm.
well. And I invited prayer. I allowed support. I gave my body what it needed in terms of, physical therapy and I see a somatic therapist who, right, does mind body integration for processing the trauma of it. And, I think that's the gift of these experiences is I can look back and say, and I think anyone listening right now can look back, like think back to a situation in your life that you weren't sure how you were going to get through, but you did because you were resourceful.
Mm.
Like, how can you apply what you learned then to something hard you're going through now? Like, how can we carry forward a lesson from the past? Because they're always there. It's just a matter of choosing to look for them and see them and draw on them.
Mhm.
And, I'm certainly stronger for having done that, but it really takes some significant soul searching and a willingness to come into a community at a time where you probably want to do anything but that. You don't want to you don't want to have the conversation with anybody else. You don't want to tell the
Mhm.
story again. You just want to be left alone to like watch Netflix and whatever. But the healing happens in community, and the healing happens when we're willing to be vulnerable and compassionately turn the mirror on ourselves and the people around us that we love,
Mhm.
be willing to speak truth and recognize, you know, what is it that's self-inflicted and what's underneath the surface of why we're showing up this way in the world, and could there be another way of having that same need met without driving ourselves into the ground, like these are hard
Mhm.
questions that we don't think about a lot.
Well, I think with high achieving people who tend to overdo, that's the very best remedy,
Yeah.
is to be able to flip it around and learn the skill of asking for help. So, for high achieving people who are always out there trying to do things for others,
Mm-hmm.
I think the balancing skill is to be able to ask for help and be able to be grateful rather than ashamed
Yeah.
when
Mm-hmm.
we get that help. I was just thinking that life teaches us the lessons that we need the most. Like there are some people, for example, that I run into who might have other lessons that are important for them, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
to be responsible and self-sufficient or whatever. But people who are prone to burnout, that is not what they need to learn. They need to learn how to be able to receive
Yes.
and ask for help
Yes.
instead of constantly going, I can rescue you. I can fix that problem.
Yeah, I've got it. Who you need somebody? I'm the super. It's like we have the superhero complex of like, if it's to be, it's up to me. And like a lot of the times I do believe that. You know what I mean? I'm like, well, I want to
Mhm.
do it a certain way, and I have a really high bar for excellence, right? We sort of like
Yeah.
blend perfectionism and excellence.
Yeah.
Um, and I think to your point about receiving, part of it is really asking ourselves a question of like, if I say yes to this, what am I saying no to? Like,
Mm.
I made a decision a couple weeks ago. I wasn't several weeks ago. I was sick. I'd gotten COVID, and I was
Mm.
asked to be on somebody's Wednesday night live stream show, and I love them. It's a good friend that I've made through LinkedIn, and their show it's a Pacific time, and it was from 9 to midnight Pacific time, and
Mm.
I was like, it was the day before I think, and I was like, I got to bail on that because I got to rest. I've just and I cleared my calendar like after when I got sick, like in early February. I reached out to my assistant and I said, I need you to clear my calendar for the back half of this week, because I just need to recover and heal and not use my voice, and I need to rest. So, so I've learned to like hire support, which it took me a year. I was in my business for over a year before I hired an assistant,
Mhm.
which was exhausting.
Mhm.
And part of that year was when I got in this accident in the midst of the pandemic. So I was doing
Mm.
everything by myself unnecessarily. And then finally, a year and a half into starting a business, I was like, maybe I should hire some help. Um,
Mhm.
and then I've learned, right? So I've learned this, the first sign. I wear also this device that is helpful for anyone listening. I wear two devices. One I
Mhm.
really love. I wear a Whoop band, WHOOP, which
Okay.
tracks like all of these different metrics, your heart rate variability, which is an indicator of like how recovered your immune system is, and fitness level. It tracks resting heart rate, and it tracks your sleep cycles. It's more robust technology in it than like an Apple Watch.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've had it for 3.5 years. I got it in the fall of 2018, and it's been really helpful. Like if my metrics go off on this thing, because I can tell myself like I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, and then when this thing is like, no, you're not, no, you're not, because sometimes we need external things to like actually bring us back to center.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm
when I saw
almost afraid to buy something like that. What would I find out? Oh my goodness.
it's just data, you know what I mean? It's like
Mm-hmm.
accountability, and I'm like, I can't really argue with
Mm-hmm.
this, you know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I can't have an emotional discussion with my wrist. So what it does when I saw my numbers spike, I was like, we are not, nope, we are shutting this down. And without, I mean, I had to postpone a podcast. But I was like, 6 months from now, it's not going to matter if those 10 things, phone calls, whatever, did not happen in those 2.5 days. But what is going to matter is that I prioritize my health and well-being, because the following week, like, 10 days later, I had my niece's 7th birthday, and I missed her 2nd birthday because that was when I was burned out in 2017. And I sat on the
Mm-hmm.
couch as my husband sent me pictures from her party. And I was just laying on the couch feeling sad, because I was like, this is not what I want my life to look like. But because I have prioritized working hard above everything else in my life, this is the situation I'm ending up in. And so I knew I want to make her birthday party, and I want to be well enough to attend that birthday party. Like, get it together, get well, give yourself the time and space you need to recover. So for basically 5 days, I was like a blob on a couch, just watching amounts of TV and drinking tea and taking supplements and getting sleep, because I knew that I needed to give my body that time
Mm-hmm.
to recover. And so now it's more of a non-negotiable for me. When I start to feel something, I start to feel myself, and I have these like tech, so an Aura ring, which is OURA, but
Mm-hmm.
I like the Whoop band better. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's more accurate. But either way, it's less conspicuous having a little ring on.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think we can use these tools. You know what I mean? We can use the tool of social support. We can use a tool of our spiritual health, whether it's, prayer, or like just being in that kind of life-giving community, or journaling, or music, or laughter, or movement, even just slow movement, like whether it's walking or yoga or dance. Singing has been another form of expression that I love. But
Mm-hmm.
like, we can choose all of these using these wearables. We can
Mm-hmm.
choose like a bunch of different tools to put in a toolkit
Mm-hmm.
to help ourselves stay accountable. And on top of this stuff, so that either it's less likely to happen in general, or if we do start to go back down that path, we nip it in the bud sooner, so that it doesn't get to the place where we're sick as a dog on the couch with no voice, missing out on moments that matter, you know?
Well, I'm going to ask you a hard question. And
Please.
and it is, what can we say to those people who don't have the choice that maybe we've had, to kind of cut back and say no to things? I'm not talking about executives, but like
Sure.
people who clean houses, people who have to, the garbage collector that has to work at 5 o'clock in the morning in the middle of winter, or
Yeah.
whatever it is, where they can't say no to their boss. They can't say, well, I'm sorry, but I feel kind of tired this morning, so I'm going to stay home,
Yeah.
because they're just living from hand to mouth or whatever. I'm just
Mhm.
thinking about all the ways in which people are afraid to speak up, because that's their job and that's their income.
Yeah.
And the job is very harsh. It drives them to a state of burnout.
Yeah.
Um, and what can we offer them in
Mm.
terms of some kind of hope?
Yeah. Well, I think the question is an important one, because it brings up the systemic issues that are
Mm-hmm.
driving this. Like, it's not just that people think that they're not enough and they're trying too hard. Like,
Mm-hmm.
to your point, there's certain systems that have been perpetuated over time, and I think certain people are more susceptible to falling into those systems, um, that can leave them in this loop of feeling like they don't have hope. Um, and so I think there's a couple things that come to mind for me. One is that
Mm-hmm.
I find actually that in perhaps like lower socioeconomic status groups, there's perhaps more of that sense of community and family as more present. I feel like I do notice that sense of community is more prevalent and more integral to their lives, whether it's some type of, whether it's their family, whether it's a friend group, whether it's their spiritual community, whether it's, any of those groups. I find that social support element tends to just be more built in almost.
And maybe even spiritual.
Yes. And their spiritual community. Yes.
Yeah. Their connection to God and their church.
I think that's a really powerful piece because, again, I think my non-scientific definition of burnout being a state of disconnection, I find that people that perhaps are in a higher SES have this need to feel that they have to hide more and put on airs and cover up and have more of a facade. Whereas I feel like, that may not be as socially expected, perhaps, in a different group of people. Having said that, there's still a lot of, I know in different groups, there's still a lot of shame and stigma around even seeking support for mental health, that you should just be able to get through it, or that you should just be able to pray your way through it, and that you don't need to get this kind of help. And so I think a couple things. One, of leaning on this support community. Who are the people that are in your circle of connection that you can lean on? Who of that group, if they knew you were struggling, who could you reach out to in that group to ask for support in one area of your life where you're taking on perhaps more than you feel like you can? Because what I find is that when people have really strong social connections and someone is suffering, and there's someone in that group that then finds out later that that person was suffering, I mean, just about every time they say, I wish you'd come to me. Like, I wish you'd let me know. And so I think really leaning into what the strength already is built in, which is that strength in community. I think another thing that people can do consistently is finding what are little things during the day that bring me joy. Maybe it's when you're driving for work. Like, is there a certain type of, this is not going to solve burnout, so I don't want to minimize it by saying this, but I'm just giving some insights on a couple of things. What is like music that you like to listen to that elevates you? Because we know that music affects and shifts our brain, So if you're, is there something that you can listen to that would elevate your mood? Is there someone that you can check in with and touch base with for 5 minutes a day that's like a boost for you? Someone that can, that you can have a quick conversation with, or just a quick check-in, that you have as almost like an accountability partner. Is there some type of really there's certain things we can do to move stress through the body so that it doesn't accumulate. So whether that's a breathing practice, I teach people a practice of called 4-7-8 breathing, where they breathe in for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8. I think one of the reasons we burn out, one reason is because there's this feeling of stuckness when we burn out. We're not moving our bodies, we're not moving our emotions through us. And so we end up in this spot where all these things accumulate and then shut us down and break us down. So I think just that breathing practice, and again, you could just have a video we could include in the show notes if you want, that guides people through the 4-7-8 breathing practice.
That'd be great.
I can send that over. Like I said, journaling is really powerful. Like, even if you just have at the end of the night or at the beginning of the day, or even just on your phone when you have a moment on a break, there's an app called Jour, Jour, that people could like access as a way to just like keep on top of their own emotions. There's another one called Mood Meter, which allows you to select on this grid, which emotional state you're feeling. And then it asks you, would you like to shift out of that state? And if so, it gives you some strategies for how you can do that. That app is $1. Yeah. Mood Meter's $1. So like anybody could afford that app. Leveraging the benefits. I mean, if you have a job that has benefits of any kind, leveraging the benefits that you might have for an employee assistance program, for therapy. Usually there's a certain number of built-in visits that people have access to as a way to just, with a third party that can just kind of almost more like objectively help you navigate and think through whatever it is that you're feeling stuck in. Anybody can think about, well, what are my values? There's an assessment we can also share in the show notes that I send people through that helps them identify their top 24 character strengths, which can also be seen as kind of values in action, and things like bravery and courage and gratitude and zest and hope. when we live in a way that's more connected to those character strengths, those are natural sources of life for us. So it might be for each person to think about, hey, if creativity is a character strength of mine, what's a way I can prioritize that even for 5 minutes, 3 times a week?
Mm-hmm.
If
Those
spirituality,
are all really
yes,
wonderful things.
practical,
I
good.
mean, I think that one thing that is very clear, um, that we don't want to fall into is thinking that we can just resolve everything by going shopping and
No,
buying things, especially for those people who are struggling to make ends meet. Um, what you're suggesting, all of those things are pretty much free.
yeah,
And one of the things that I'm reminded of is some of the suggestions in the book called The Miracle Morning, where you set aside time in the morning for 6 different activities, all of which are completely free. And it's all about visualization and affirmation and journaling and a little bit of exercise. And all of those things can start to, bring that energy into your life in a
yeah,
positive way and start to shift you from the burnout state to maybe a better state of being. Yeah.
yeah. I agree. And I know there's a gratitude practice built into that. So even at the end of the day, before your
Mm-hmm.
head hits the pillow, like, what are 3 good things that happened? I mean, we know that's a proven practice, right? Of what are 3 good things that happened, and
Mm-hmm.
how did you have any role in making those happen? And picking one of these things to try for 2 weeks. I think a lot of times
Mm-hmm.
people are like, right, I get up at 5 a.m. already, or I get up at 4 a.m. already. Like, I'm going to sit there and journal about it. It's like, part of it is, uh, it's a choice. Like, we
Mm-hmm.
have to recognize, right, that everything, that's Viktor Frankl quote, right? It's like everything can be taken from a man except, this is a botched version of the quote, but like essentially accept our ability to choose our attitude and how we
Mm-hmm.
respond to any given set of circumstances. Like,
Right.
that's coming from a Holocaust survivor. So like, not an easy life, who lost his
Mm-hmm.
wife and unborn child and other family members, and made it through 4 years in concentration camps. Like, I'd say he has a bit to offer of insight. So
Mm-hmm.
I'd even anyone to read or listen to the book Man's Search for Meaning,
It's a
like,
wonderful book.
it's just, we sometimes we need perspective too about how much of this really is completely out of my control.
Yeah.
Complete, like, I think sometimes we have to be honest with ourselves about that, because we've seen people that rise up from just unimaginable
Mm-hmm.
circumstances and challenges that are able to do something, and to make change happen, and to
Mm-hmm.
activate that sense of agency. If someone's come from a really traumatic background, uh, and they have been disempowered for a really long time, and they don't think that they can make decisions that have a positive impact on their life, it is harder to do all of this stuff. Like, it just is. And that's where I think social support comes in as, like, again, number one
Mm-hmm.
of reaching out to people.
One of the things that you mentioned about attitude reminded me of the fact that a lot of people aren't spending enough time turning inward. Like you say, when you journal, you tend to turn inward, you reflect. And because of that, they're not really able to process how maybe their childhood or how their filters are constantly, recreating the same kind of patterns that are not helpful for their lives. And what I mean by that is, um, I have some neighborhood friends, and some of them I go walking with on a more regular basis. And I think that one of the things that I've observed is that you could have like everything kind of in place. You could have a lovely home, a wonderful husband. You don't have to work. You could just, beautiful surroundings. You have free time, but it doesn't really mean that you can be happy. It's almost like if you don't have the internal reflection already worked, if you don't work on yourself,
Yeah.
you will still find
Mhm.
something to be irritated about or feel indignant about.
Mhm.
Like, for example, I was at a dinner party and 2 women who are just, their life is really about pretty much anything you want, they have.
Mhm.
And so their choice of conversation is how indignant they are that we did not get enough rain on our side of the mountain,
Oh my gosh.
right? So there is still always something that you can be unhappy about. And so I think that to be able to look at attitude as a kind of like their mirror sides, you can have a perfect life and still be miserable depending on
Yep.
your attitude. You can have a miserable circumstances and still have a very positive attitude. So
Yes.
what kind of life you have actually comes from our ability to kind of choose
Yes.
and make, healing process. It's not like something that will automatically come, but you have to actually invest and practice
Yes.
a certain way of living that you can, choose a certain positive attitude.
Yes.
That's what I think.
It's a choice. You sharing that brought up something I haven't talked about in a while,
Mm-hmm.
which is something that in 2013, my husband and I went on a missions trip to Nicaragua.
Mm-hmm.
And we spent time with kids that were in orphanages there. And there were times where we would all come together and they would have like a church service, and they would have singing and like time for worship music. You have never seen such joy coming from a room full of people as you saw in this setting from people whose like children whose like hair is discolored because they're malnourished. And yet they're so connected to each other as a community, and they're so connected to the sense of hope that they get from their faith and joy that they get from their faith and from community, that they're like dancing around the room and singing, and the room is like electrified. But by society, generally speaking, right, wider society's standards, it doesn't logically make sense that these people could show up with such joy.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they do, And so it's like the things, I think one of the things we've hopefully recognized in the past 2 years, especially, is like all the stuff that we maybe took for granted, like being able to hug somebody or being able to just be in somebody else's presence or being able to travel freely or being able, to be in close proximity, even talking to a stranger and see their smile. Like these are things that we took for granted that we didn't even think about for so long. And I think I just did my first in-person keynote earlier this year, like fully in person since the pandemic. So in almost 2 years. And just to like hear people's laughter and see them smile and see their tears and see them laughing and talking with each other, I was like, oh my gosh, I've missed this. And like this is what it's about. Like at the end of the day, the thing that we're after is a sense of belonging and joy and peace and connection. Like, so all the things that we're pursuing are ultimately because we think those things are going to get us those ultimate goals of
Right.
love, belonging, joy, connection. And it's like, well, what if you could have those things already without having to like rise through any other rank or, I think it's just a really helpful perspective to have. I mean, we don't know, we're not promised tomorrow. I mean, when I got hit, it was a pickup truck that hit me. I didn't see that coming. I fractured my back and damaged my ankle and then had the trauma of the experience. But like, and a lot of people did the comparative stuff of like comparative suffering. Like, oh, I know somebody who had to get pins and they're like, great, I'm not that person. I'm glad I didn't get paralyzed, but this still sucks. But at the same time, I'm like, what a gift that I worked in a job that as my own boss, I could make the call on what I couldn't go to. Like if I had been a nurse and that happened, I would have had to go out on disability for I have no idea how long. I mean, I couldn't bend, lift, or twist for 4 months. Like, so part of it, and I was born into like privilege. You know what I mean? Like my parents were both college educated. They both came from families where that was not the norm. Like they really made something of themselves from the families that they had come from, and they went against the norms of what their siblings did and what was expected of them, and really wanted more for themselves. And they didn't come from entrepreneurial families, but they're both entrepreneurs. They were teachers, and then they decided to work for themselves, and that was my model. And what a gift that I, grew up in a place where I was really well educated. Like I recognize that, and so for me, I feel like I'm glad that you asked the question because I don't have all the answers to it. About how we sort of more systemically address this broadly and not just for the highest performing, most well-to-do people. that tends to be more of my target because of the places and circles that I speak into. But I find that regardless of someone's income level, these messages of disconnection, of a desire to achieve and prove and impress in order to be loved and accepted, that like these are fairly common human experiences, regardless of what someone's paycheck says. And the need for connection to our body and to each other and to our spirituality and to a higher power, that all of those things are important for every human being. You know, these are universally human messages, which is what I think makes them resonant for people.
Yeah, I just feel like your message overall, if we had to have a bigger umbrella, is all the different ways in which connection can help bring back a greater state of health and happiness.
Yeah.
A connection to ourselves, a connection within the community, and maybe even through the pandemic, a realization of our connection globally.
Yes.
And perhaps one step beyond that is our connection to the planet.
Yeah.
And as stewards of the planet and plants and animals that live here, that there's so many things that can enhance our health if we can make healthy connections,
Yes.
is what you're saying,
Yes.
right?
True. And I appreciate, because when I appreciate something I appreciate about you is I always can see like a fellow connector. And I can tell that you're somebody who like in the midst of something is always like connecting the dots. And I love talking to people that do that, because like it's really energizing. And that is my goal. And it is the starting from within. And sometimes we get that connection to self better through connection to others. Like, you know, the friend who said, hey, basically you're showing up as a fraud without saying that quite that way, said that in a gentler, kinder way. Her saying that gives me a heightened sense of awareness. Or a woman asking me the question, are you happy, after listening to me do a workshop on how to build a thriving culture at work for 2 hours, and catching me in a moment of no. You know, those people that are willing to ask the hard questions, I see myself as that for a lot of people. Like, I'm a catalyst who is going to show up and ask you a question that might make you a little uncomfortable, but for the goal of self-discovery and self-awareness, so that ultimately you can show up in a more intentional way in the world, as opposed to living your life on default, or just like everything's happening to you. Like, I don't believe, I choose to not look at life as all this stuff's happening to me. Oh my gosh, what can I do about it? It's like, how can I respond? How can I respond to all these things that are happening around me? And there's a guy named Mark Brackett out of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence who wrote a really great book called Permission to Feel. And, you know, he says we can't choose what happens to us or around us, but we do get to choose our response, which is basically a Viktor Frankl modification of a quote. But and that's so true. And I think that more than ever, that's what's so important to remember, you know, as people, I think, walk away from this conversation, is to really think about that. Like, what can you control? Like, really, like, you have control over the extent to which you practice gratitude. You have control over your attitude. You have control about where you invest your time and energy. You have control about what news you watch, or what social media you watch, or what podcasts you listen to, or what books you read, or who you talk to, or what you eat, or to an extent, again, from socioeconomic standpoint, some people might have more freedom with that. The extent to which you move your body, like, we have control over a lot, And that's what I think one of the ways we get unstuck is to remind ourselves. We make a literal list of what are all the things I have control over. Okay, now I have more of a sense of agency and confidence that I could actually do something about this, because I do have control over more things than I've given myself credit for.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that everyone yearns for is to be valued, to be appreciated, to have that affirmation in their lives. And unfortunately, when we go to social media, there's a certain level of not being in control of how many people like you, or how many people look at your whatever things that you create. And that kind of gives kind of a unhealthy connection between
Mm.
what you create and how you value it from your own personal perspective, because you have control. People have control in terms of creating their thing. They don't have control in terms of how other people or how many other people can appreciate it also.
Correct.
And so I think a lot of times that creates a sense of dissatisfaction or a personal kind of denigration, like, oh, I didn't get a million likes, so therefore I'm a nobody, or whatever it is
Yeah.
that, we have to kind of step away from those kind of social conditioning and
Yeah.
just be independent of that and say, these are things that I enjoy, and let's get back to being the creative person that are enjoying creating things. I can't control how it gets perceived in the outer universe, but we can control our attitudes and a feeling of the glass half full rather than glass
Yeah.
empty.
Yeah, it's like, to your point, it's like we can control our attitudes and we can control our outputs. But
Mm-hmm.
we can't control. I mean, I heard, and frankly, there are some people that are getting a million likes on stuff that are like a total sham. I mean, I talked to there's a guy who's going to be doing some videography
Mm-hmm.
for me for an event, and he was telling me about somebody he worked with before, who was a keynote speaker.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, I fired this client. Like, I stopped working with him after a period of time because like everyone that was like on stage, when he was on stage and he came off stage, people were like fawning over him, like how amazing he was. Oh my gosh, that was amazing. And he just like soaked it in, soaked it in. And then like he would turn aside to like walk away from that and go like, cuss out somebody who was like helping him with something, or like the people that were actually closest to him that knew him the best couldn't stand him.
Oh,
And he was
okay.
like, so here it is, this person is getting surface shallow praise from people that
Mm-hmm.
don't really know him,
Mm-hmm.
don't really know him. And what are the people that are going to be there when he's off the stage, which is probably why he tries to spend so much time on the stage, because he's avoiding the fact that he's out of alignment and doesn't have integrity with the people that know him best. And that's really painful. But some people's egos are not at a place where they're humble enough to be able to see that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really sad. And that's not uncommon, that people have an experience of like, well, I get a lot of accolades at work, so I feel competent there. At home, I suck as a husband. So I'm going to spend as much time at work because my wife nags me and I get reminded all the time of how I don't do something right or how I don't do it enough. But at work, I'm making bonuses and I'm getting accolades and I'm winning awards. So I'm just going to spend less and less time in the place where I need the most growth because I feel more incompetent. And I think it takes courage to even be willing to go to those relationships and be vulnerable and say like, hey, I know, like, I mean, I sat across from my husband in May of 2017. That would not be Valentine's Day for anyone doing the math on that. It's 4 months after Valentine's Day, to make up our Valentine's Day dinner. And he's a teacher. My husband's a teacher. And I reached off the table and I reached out and I held his hand and I said, for the first time in like 6, 7, 8 months, how are you doing? And he got kind of teary eyed and he was like, it's been hard. It's been, I had nothing to give. I had no energy. I had no libido. When I had mono, he had to do a lot for me. And he just took it in stride. He's a really humble guy. I mean, I'm very blessed we've been together 16 years and he is so much of the reason I've gotten through any really hard thing. Practically, tangibly, just with love and emotional support. And I think why, and sometimes I have to challenge myself on this because I can get caught up in numbers on social media. I love when 400 people like a post that I share and 80 people comment on it. I like that. It's validating. It's like, oh, this resonated. To me, it's like, oh, this had impact in some way, like metric, impact, great. But what about the impact I'm having on the person that I'm spending more time with than anybody else? Like, doesn't that matter? Like the person who, like, people on social media were kind of reached out and sent text messages and prayers and cards and stuff when I had the car accident, but they weren't here putting me in the shower at 4 o'clock in the morning when I woke up with back spasms, and they weren't doing all the grocery shopping and making all the meals and cleaning the house and doing laundry and sleeping on the couch for 2 months while I slept in a recliner or putting my back brace on every morning. They weren't there for that. And he was. And I think sometimes we lose sight, we take for granted the people that are like really there. And we get caught up in the illusion of like, and the affirmation of the people that are not necessarily going to be there when it's hardest, you know? And I think, if anything, my experience with burnout really gave me some important perspective about not putting work above so much that I then wasn't able to be present for the people that I say that I love the most, you know?
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to tie up our podcast. I think it's a very touching message. And I also agree with you wholeheartedly with your whole message of being connected, being vulnerable, not letting your ego get manipulated by social conditioning to, go for the false, accolades, but to truly grow. I think that it's all about our spirit wanting to grow in some way. And sometimes it's through really hard experiences. And I think when we are open and humble enough to take those experiences and grow and learn from them, we come away from those experiences, 10 times better as human beings than we were before those experiences. So it looks like you've had quite a few experiences that's really pushed you to grow. And for a young professional, I think that that's, you have a remarkable ability to take those experiences and really just absorb the growth that it was meant to give you, on a spiritual and emotional level. So I just want to tell you how much I appreciate your message. And I think it's going to be really helpful for other people to hear you.
Right.
And I hope lots of people will be able to enjoy this. Of course, the advantage of a podcast or YouTube is that they'll stay up there forever. And even though we may not have like 50 million, likes in the beginning, eventually, the people who are looking for it will be able to find it. So
Agreed.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So you're welcome. Any last messages or things that you want to leave or contact information that you want to share with those people who are listening?
Yeah, sure. So every other week I do a newsletter on LinkedIn called Unmute Yourself. And that's really what we were talking about today. Really, it's like speaking up, using your voice, advocating, asking for help. So much of that for me is what is at the core of the unmuted message. So connecting on LinkedIn, and either of us, and I would love to hear if you listen to this podcast, send us a message. Like, people think it's creepy. I'm like, it is so not creepy. It is so cool. When somebody reaches out and said, hey, I listened to this podcast, it really resonated with me. We love hearing from you. So let us know. And then I have a LinkedIn live show every other Monday. People can follow me on LinkedIn to learn more about that. And then they can follow me on my website, which is unmutedlife.com, to just learn more about articles I've written and the work that I do with leaders and organizations and teams. And lastly, I'm getting more active on this platform on Instagram. I'm getting more active. So those are the three: LinkedIn, my website, and Instagram, I would say.
And we'll put all of those things also on our podcast and on YouTube, all the different connections to your platforms. And I guess I would also like to add that it would be wonderful if people enjoyed our show, that they can share it with other people and let other people, have the same kind of enjoyment. So to finish up our interview, I just wanted to thank everyone who's listened to us and those who have taken the time to, reflect on this very important topic of burnout. I hope that you've enjoyed today's content. Please contact us, make a comment, share this interview with other people that you know. And if you haven't done so already, I hope that you'll subscribe to my weekly updates on my website, holisticspsychiatrist.com, for wonderful stories and developments from my holistic practice, and where you'll find links to all my social media platforms. Until next time, let's keep building our well-being from the thought up, and have a wonderful, joyful week. I look forward to having you join us next week. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.